بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد، we are continuing what we had previously begun, and we took a break for the month of Ramadan. This is the book Zadul-Ma'ad fi Hadi Khayr al-Ibad, authored by Al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, regarding the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we had reached the chapter of fasting. We discussed a lot of the things with regards to fasting, a lot of the rulings, a lot of the narrations, etc. However, we did not conclude all of what Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah spoke about with regards to fasting. And there is some follow-up as well that is involved. And that is that what days are preferable for a person to fast, what days are impermissible outside of the month of Ramadan. This is something important for us to continue, even though the month of Ramadan for this year is now behind us. يقول ابن القيم رحمه الله تعالى: يقول ابن القيم رحمه الله تعالى: ولا يصح عنه، أي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، ولا يصح عنه صلى الله عليه وسلم التفريق في القبلة بين الشاب والشيخ، ولم يجئ من وجه يثبت. ثم أجاب عن حديث أن رجلا سأل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم عن المباشرة للصائم فرخص له، وأتاه آخر فسأله فنهاه، فإذا الذي رخص له شيخ والذي نهاه شاب. هذا الحديث أخرجه أبو داود رحمه الله تعالى في سننه بإسناد ضعيف. هذه رواية معروفة بين الناس، وقد ذهب بعض العلماء إلى التفرقة بين من له شهوة ولا يستطيع أن يتملك نفسه، ومن كانت شهوته أضعف أو استطاع أن يتملك نفسه إذا قبل أو باشر امرأته، وبنوا هذا على هذه الرواية. وهذه الرواية لا تثبت، والتفرقة بين الشيخ والشاب بهذا الشكل لا يثبت، لكن يفهم منها من هذه الرواية وإن كانت ضعيفة، فإنه يصح أن من كانت له شهوة شديدة لا يستطيع أن يتملك نفسه، فإنه لا يجوز أن يفعل ما يفضي به إلى ما حرم الله سبحانه وتعالى. فإن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ينهى عن الشيء وينهى عن الوسائل التي تؤدي إلى هذا الشيء. قال تعالى: ولا تقربوا هذه الشجرة. المحرم هو الأكل من الشجرة، لكن القرب من الشجرة يؤدي إلى هذا، فنهاهم الله تعالى عن القربان من الشجرة. فالمعنى فيه صحة، لكن التفرقة في العمر قد يفهم من ذلك أن الغالب على الناس أن من كان شيخا فإنه في الغالب شهوته ليست كشهوة الشاب، شديدة في الشاب دون الشيخ، لكن المقصود والمضمون صحيح. There's a narration that Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah discusses that is a very popular narration. Many of us have heard this narration. It's collected by Abu Dawud rahimahullah in his Sunan. that the Prophet ﷺ was asked by someone, is it permissible for me to kiss my wife or fondle my wife while I am fasting? The Prophet ﷺ allowed him to do so. And another came to him and asked him the same question, and he prohibited him. He said, no, that's not permissible. And so the narrator concludes that the person that asked him and he allowed him was an elderly gentleman, and the person that he prohibited the same thing was a young man. This narration is collected by Abu Dawood rahimahullah in the book of fasting of his Sunnah, and it is an inauthentic narration. It is not narrated with an acceptable chain of transmission from the Prophet ﷺ. Yet, we can still understand the spirit of this narration, even though it is inauthentic. There are other verses in the Quran, narrations, that do articulate a similar meaning. What is the reason? Well, it's, the spirit of the narration is that a person who is older, if he were to kiss his wife or if he were to touch his wife, a hug or something while they are fasting, he will be able to control himself and not let it go beyond that. Because what's prohibited is intercourse while a person is fasting. And so the older person, a person who is an old man, usually is more capable of containing himself and containing his urges. Whereas a young man, maybe newlywed, maybe has a very strong, perhaps insatiable desire. And if this person were to kind of open that can of worms, they would not be able to unring that bell per se. That a kiss would lead to, that which would be a major sin in Islam, which is intercourse during the day of Ramadan for one who is fasting. And so, this spirit is correct, and that is that if a person is unable to contain himself, and this thing will directly lead them to that which is haram, or most likely lead them to that which is haram, then it becomes haram in itself. Whether the person is old or young, there's not really a set difference. Human beings, they vary. Their hormones vary. Their libido or their drive varies. And so some are more able to discipline themselves and contain themselves, while others are not. And so if a person understands from himself that he is unable to control himself, then that would become impermissible if it certainly or most certainly will lead to that which is haram. And this goes with everything. It's not just in fasting. This is a general rule. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to Adam and Hawa alayhim as-salam, do not come near this tree. What is prohibited is eating from the tree. But he prohibited them from coming near the tree because coming near it will directly result in them falling into that which is haram. So this narration is inauthentic. However, what we can take away from this and what the scholars have driven home in the spirit of such narrations is that if a person is unable to contain himself, then this may become haram. Whereas a person who is able to control himself, then there is, in essence, nothing wrong, and it does not interfere with a person's fast to kiss or hug or do any of the things that a husband and wife would usually do, as long as there is no intercourse involved. يقول رحمه الله والذي صح عنه أي عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أن الذي يفطر به الصائم الأكل والشرب والحجامة والقيء، والقرآن دل على أن الجماع مفطر ولا يعرف فيه خلاف، يعني هذه مسألة مجمع عليها، ولا يصح عنه في الكحل شيء ولا أنه احتجم وهو صائم. هذه الروايات لا تصح عنه صلى الله عليه وسلم. روايات أنه احتجم وهو صائم هذا مختلف فيه بين العلماء، فبين مصحح ومضعف، وهو أمر مشهور بين العلماء، فقد روى الإمام البخاري رحمه الله ما يدل على أنه احتجم، ولكن هذا الحديث رواه البخاري معلقا يعني بلا إسناد. فهذه الرواية اختلف العلماء هل هي صحيحة، هل احتجم وهو الصائم أو هو احتجم وهو محرم، خلاف في الرواية. وعلى كل حال هذه من مفردات الإمام أحمد ومذهب الإمام أحمد رحمه الله. الإمام أحمد دون إخواني من الفقهاء الثلاثة أصحاب المذاهب أبي حنيفة ومالك والشافعي، فإن الإمام أحمد رحمه الله قد رجح أن الحجامة مفطر، الحجامة مفطر، وعلى ذلك يبنى ما يبنى عليه من سحب الدم وهذه الأشياء أن هذه تفطر. والغالب من الفقهاء والذي نميل إليه والله أعلم أن الحجامة لا تفطر بذاتها ولا يفطر سحب الدم وما شابه ذلك. كذلك قال هنا أن الذي يفطر به الصائم الأكل والشرب يعني عمدا، والحجامة ذكرنا الخلاف فيه، والقيء يعني عمدا. إذا الإنسان استقاء يعني هو تقيأ، جعل نفسه يتقيأ، فإن هذا يفطر. لكنه إذا تقيأ دون إرادة ليس عمدا فإنه يتم صومه، كما صح عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من حديث أبي هريرة عند الترمذي. قال والقرآن دل على أن الجماع مفطر ولا يعرف فيه خلاف ولا يصح عنه في الكحل شيء. ثم روايات ضعيفة لا تصح عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أن المكتحل عليه أن الكحل يفطر، لأنهم يرون أن من اكتحل فإنه قد يجد أثر هذا الاكتحال في حلقه، فبعض الفقهاء ذهب إلى أن الاكتحال فإنه مفطر، وكذلك السواك وما شابه ذلك. وهذه أقوال مرجوحة وفيها نظر، والراجح أن الكحل لا يفطر، والتسوك لا يفطر، والادهان لا يفطر، أن يدهن الإنسان على نفسه شيئا. وكذلك من الأمور الحديثة فإن الحقنة لا تفطر، والإبر والبنج وسحب الدم وهذه الأشياء وخلع الضرس وما شابه ذلك، هذه كلها لا تفطر في الراجح من أقوال العلماء، والله أعلم. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah mentions that what has been authentically collected with regards to that which breaks a person's fast is eating or drinking, meaning purposely. Right. Eating or drinking anything, and in a more specific way, eating or drinking anything intentionally, or that which takes the place of eating or drinking, or that which goes the path of food and drink. This will break a person's fast. And we discussed this in detail in our previous discussions. We're just going over it because Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah mentions it here as part of the book. Another thing that he mentions is that al-hijama cupping will break a person's fast. Cupping. What is cupping? Cupping is a prophetic medicine where a person will have blood drawn. So the area that they are cupping will, there will be suction, and then a razor will be used to let the blood, and then more suction, and it will, it's called bloodletting or cupping. And this is something that the scholars of hadith differ on, whether or not it breaks a person's fast. There are a few narrations in this regard. Number one, there's a narration that Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah mentions in his Sahih, in his authentic compilation. But he mentions it without a chain of narration, which means that it's not part of Sahih al-Bukhari. Sahih al-Bukhari, what is Sahih al-Bukhari are the narrations that he mentions with his chains of narration, right? There are other narrations that he'll just mention in passing, but he won't mention a chain of narration because they don't meet his criteria. One of these narrations is that the Prophet ﷺ did cupping while he was fasting. That's how the narration goes. He did cupping, bloodletting, while he was fasting. In other narrations, it was that he did this cupping while he was in ihram. So the narrators differ on what the narration actually is. Difference of opinion. Al-Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, his opinion with regards to this narration is that bloodletting will break a person's fast. There's another narration in a Sunnah that states that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Aftara al-hajim wal-muhtajim," that the person who does the cupping and the person who receives the cupping, both of them have broken their fast. This narration is also a point of discussion amongst the scholars of hadith, and its meaning is also differed upon. The opinion that is most sound, that the majority of the scholars hold, is that bloodletting will not break a person's fast in and of itself. Meaning if a person, why is this important? It's important because a lot of things are derived and based on this kind of narration. Is the Prophet ﷺ saying that bloodletting, cupping, in and of itself breaks a person's fast, even if it's just a few drops, even if it's just a little bit? It's known that, for instance, if you were to eat a big meal, and then you go to do this cupping, you go to do this bloodletting, or even if you go to draw blood, you will not be able to get very much blood at all, because most of the blood rushes to the stomach to help with the digestive process. So, is there a difference if a lot of blood comes out, or even if just a little bit, or the mere action of bloodletting will break a person's fast? The opinion that the majority of the scholars hold is that bloodletting will not break a person's fast in and of itself. Meaning that the action itself, if you have blood drawn, if you bleed, if you have a tooth pulled and you start to bleed, or if you get a cut and you bleed a lot, does this break your fast? The answer is no. This will not break a person's fast in and of itself. If a person goes to donate blood, will that break their fast? No. In and of itself, it will not. However, if a person bleeds out, or if a person, has some kind of accident, or if a person has blood drawn and they become dizzy and they become wary, then a person has to break their fast to eat, to regenerate their body. So the bloodletting itself does not break a person's fast, whereas a person may need to break his fast for some other reason. But the blood itself coming out of the body will not break a person's fast, in the opinion of the majority of the scholars. He says in the Quran, indicates that intercourse will break a person's fast, and it is not known that any scholar has ever differed on this issue. No scholar in the history of Islam who is notable has been known to say that intercourse will not break a person's fast. All of the scholars agree that intercourse will break a person's fast. He says, and it's not authentic what has been narrated with regards to all the narrations regarding kuhl, which is coal in the eye, that this will break a person's fast. There are some narrations that putting something in the eye, right, like for a woman makeup, or for a man, kuhl or eye drops or something of that sort, that this will break a person's fast. Why? Because sometimes a person may use something in his eye and kind of like have a taste of it in the back of his throat. Feel like some of that eye drop had reached to the back of his throat. Will this break a person's fast? No. There's no narration that is authentic regarding anything, regarding the eye being a path that will break a person's fast. What do we mean by path that will break a person's fast? Well, we said what leads into the stomach, right? So a path that leads into the stomach is the mouth. A path that leads into the stomach is the nose, right? But the eye is not a path that leads to the stomach. I mean, there may be some residual thing that may, find its way into a person's throat, but it's not a normal path to the stomach. So it is not something that is considered to break a person's fast. Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah then goes on to mention some of the times when it is most preferable for a person to fast. الإنسان إذا صام رمضان هذا الصيام ركن من أركان الإسلام وهو واجب بإجماع العلماء. لكن إذا أراد الإنسان أن يصوم في غير رمضان فأي الأيام يصومها وأي الشهور خير الشهور للصيام وهكذا. يقول ابن القيم رحمه الله: صيام 10 ذي الحجة مختلف عنه فيه والمثبت مقدم على النافي إن صح. ماذا يقصد ابن القيم رحمه الله؟ يقصد ابن القيم رحمه الله أن بعض الصحابة أثبت أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يصوم ذا الحجة أو يصوم أكثره، وبعض الصحابة نفى ذلك وقال ما كان يصوم. طيب إذا عندنا رواية صحيحة صحابي بيقول نعم صام فعل، ورواية أخرى صحابي صحيحة يقول هذا الصحابي لا ما فعل، كيف الحين ماذا نصنع؟ كيف الآن نرجح هذه المسألة؟ مش ممكن إنه فعل وما فعل في نفس الوقت، هذا إشي مستحيل. فلازم واحد يقدم على الثاني، لا بد أن نقدم أحدهما على الثاني. فعندنا المثبت الذي قال أيوة رأيته يفعل، وعندك النافي الذي يقول ما فعل. من نقدم في هذه الحال؟ نعم، هذه مسألة قال بها بعض العلماء، يعني الأحناف قالوا ننظر إلى الصحابي فننظر أيهما هو أفقه وأيهما، لكن هذا القول فيه ضعف. لماذا؟ لأن هذه المسألة ليست مسألة فقه وليست مسألة فيها يعني فيها كبير فهم، وإنما هي مسألة إيش؟ نقل. شفت ولا ما شفت؟ ممكن تكون فقيه وممكن تكون جاهل، لكن شفت ولا ما شفت؟ صحيح؟ إذن هذه مسألة قال بها بعض الأحناف، لكنه قول ضعيف، قول ضعيف، لأن النقل يختلف عن الفتوى. فإذا عندنا المثبت والمنفي، أيهما نقدم؟ صحيح، نقدم المثبت على المنفي. لماذا؟ لأن المنفي إنما عبر عن ما علم، والمثبت عبر عن ما علم. فالأصل عدم الفعل ولا الفعل؟ الأصل عدم الفعل، صح ولا لا؟ أنت بتقول الشيخ حكى هيك، الأصل إني حكيت ولا ما حكيت؟ الأصل إني ما حكيت، ساكت إلا بدليل. فلما بيجي واحد وبيجيب لنا دليل واضح إنه أيوة فعل، هذا يقدم، لأنه يعبر عن ما شهده. وأما المنفي فعبر عن ما شهده، لكن النفي أوسع بكثير من الإثبات. الإثبات أخص، والمخصص يقدم على العموم. هذه مسألة معروفة عند الفقهاء، لكن على كل حال هذا يأتي أحيانا، يثبت صحابي للنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فعلا وآخر ينفيه، والروايتان صحيحتان، فماذا نصنع؟ نقدم المثبت على المنفي إن لم نستطع أن نجمع بين القولين. الأصل أنه نجمع بين القولين، لكن إذا ما كان في سبيل للجمع بين القولين قدمنا المثبت على المنفي، لأن هذا هو نقل، هو ينقل عما شهده. هو يقول رأيته يفعل كذا، ممكن احنا نقول له لا ما رأيت، ما نقدر. فالمثبت مقدم على المنفي. فهذا هو مقصد ابن القيم رحمه الله حينما يقول والمثبت مقدم على النافي إن صح، يعني إن صحت الروايتان، فالذي أثبت أنه صام في ذي الحجة فهو مقدم على الذي نفى صيامه في ذي الحجة، لأنه أنت بتنفي ما فعل. طيب شو بعرفك؟ بجوز فعل، أنت شهدت أنه ما فعل، لكن غيرك شهد أنه فعل. نعم. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah transitions and segues into the issue of fasting when it is preferable. When is it preferable for a person to fast outside of Ramadan? So you fast the month of Ramadan, and now you want to fast some additional fasting, some, optional fasting. What is the best time to fast? A person can essentially fast any day of the year. There are certain days when it is prohibited to fast. We will get into those days, inshallah. But for the most part, aside from these 5 or 6 days which is prohibited for a person to fast, an optional fast, then a person can fast any day. You can fast Monday, you can fast Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You can fast. However, what is preferable? If I wanted to choose a day, or if I wanted to choose a month, or if I wanted to choose a series of days, then which of these times is preferable for me to fast? He mentions, rahimahullah ta'ala, fasting the month or the 10 days of Durhedja. The companions differed. Some of them said he fasted the first 10 days of Durhedja, meaning day 1 through day 9, including the day of Arafah. It's referred to as the 10 of Durhedja, just in a generalized fashion. Otherwise, it's actually 9 days, because you're not going to fast the day of Eid, which is the 10th day, right? So some of the companions said, yes, he fasted these 10 days of Dhul Hijjah. while other companions said, no, he did not fast. Right? This is a difference of opinion amongst the companions, radiyallahu anhum. Some of them said he fasted, others said, no, he did not fast. This is something that is rare. It's not common in narrations that the companions... نعم هذا هو التوفيق. يعني نحن ذكرنا أننا نقدم المثبت على النافي إن لم نستطع التوفيق. صح ولا لا؟ إن لم نستطع التوفيق، لكن إذا استطاع الإنسان التوفيق فإنه لا يهمل رواية من الروايتين، لأنني إذا قلت هذا مقدم على هذا، المقدم عليه نفيته الحين ما بستعمله، عطلته. فلذلك إذا جاء واستطعت التوفيق وجب التوفيق. نحن لا نقدم أحدهما على الآخر إلا إذا ما نستطيع أن نوفق. أصل التوفيق بين الروايات. لا مش في هذه الرواية، لا ما بتزبط، لأنه جاءت الصيغة كان يصوم 10 ذي الحجة. هذه الكلمة كان شو معناها؟ استمرار، صح ولا لا؟ وآخر يقول ما كان يصوم. يعني عندنا مشكلة، صح ولا لا؟ الحين بدنا نقول؟ بدنا نقول السنة إنه الواحد يصوم مرات وبعض مرات ما يصوم. غريبة هذه. لا، في صوم شهر شعبان روت نساء النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه كان يصوم في شعبان، لكن ليس دائما. لكن 10 ذي الحجة فيه حث من الله سبحانه وتعالى في القرآن ومن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم للأعمال كلها في 10 ذي الحجة، خلافا لشعبان. شعبان ما في هذا الكلام. أنا أدري، بس الحين شهر شعبان فيه بين العلماء، يعني بين الصحابة، في القرآن في السنة إشي يحثنا على شعبان بنفسه، اعملوا الأعمال كلها الطيبة، يحثنا في الأعمال في شعبان، ما في. لكن ذو الحجة والأشهر الحرم بشكل عام أو 10 ذي الحجة بشكل خاص فيه. ومن الأعمال الصالحة الصيام. فإنه الإنسان يقول لا، إحنا نمسك عن الأعمال الصالحة في سنة، والسنة الجاي ما نمسك عن الأعمال الصالحة. كيف هذه بدها ما تركب؟ عرفت كيف؟ فشعبان هذا أمر يختلف، والقول فيه يختلف، وخلاف الصحابة في ذلك معروف، وهذا يرجع كذلك إلى صحة الرواية. والراجح أن الرواية تصح أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يصوم أكثر شعبان. صحت هذه الرواية عند أحمد وغيره. على كل حال، when it comes to the issue of a companion who says, this happened, I saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam do this. And then we have another companion who says, this did not happen. This is not common. This doesn't happen often. This is very rare, actually. However, it does come up where a companion will say the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not do this. And another companion will say he did do this. If we are at that crossroads and we are unable to harmonize the two statements, we're not able to harmonize those two statements. They are mutually exclusive. They are opposing statements. One says he did it, the other says he didn't. What do we do in this case? So we have kind of a checklist. Number one, we look at the chains of narration. We see, are the chains of narration authentic? Are they correct? Now, I'm obviously talking to you about what the scholars do. When I say we, I mean the method that the scholars go through. We look at the chain of narration. We make sure that both are authentic narrations. Because if one of them is weak and the other is authentic, we take the authentic, right? So if both narrations are authentic, then we go to the second level, and that is trying to harmonize the two statements. I need to try to make harmonize where both statements are used. If this is not possible, then we have a third and final stage where I have to choose one. One has to be correct, and the other has to be incorrect. It's not possible for yes and no to be both correct at the same time, right? In the exact same way. So Ibn Al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, he gives us a very valuable principle. And that principle states that in this rare occasion, if one says this did not happen, and the other says this did happen, then we take the one who we give precedence to, the one who affirms that action, the one who says, I saw him do this. That narration, that statement takes precedence over, he never did this. Because which one is more general? He never did this. That's a much more broad statement, correct? As opposed to someone saying, I saw him do this. That's much more specific. And in Islamic logic, Islamic logicians, Ahlul Usul, they mention that which is specific takes precedence over that which is general. Let's give an example of this. So, there's a narration in which Hudayfa radiyallahu anhu, he says, I saw the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam while we were traveling, and we came over this area, and it was kind of an inhospitable area. It was where the mezbala. The mezbala is the place where, the community, the village, they all throw their garbage. It's like the village dump, if you will. And the Prophet ﷺ needed to relieve himself. However, if he were to sit to relieve himself, it was more likely that he would soil his clothing, soil himself. And so Hudayfa says, I saw him, that he stood covering his private parts and relieved himself, meaning urination, right? So Hudayfa said, I saw this. We were traveling, we were going to war and a journey, and I saw him do this. Aisha, on the other hand, she said, the Prophet ﷺ never relieved himself standing up. It never happened. Whoever tells you that he did is wrong. So now we have Hudayfa saying, I saw this happen, and Aisha saying, he never did this. We go through our checklist, right? Number one, we have to check on the chain of narration. Both of them are authentic. Like number two, we have to harmonize, right? Well, Aisha, the way that she said it, it's not possible to harmonize this narrations. Because Aisha said, whoever tells you he did is wrong. كذب يعني غلط في لغة قريش. He said, whoever tells you this doesn't know what he's talking about, is wrong. So it's not possible to harmonize between the statement of Hudayfa and the statement of Aisha. But the question here has to come up. Was Aisha with the Prophet ﷺ every single time he went everywhere? No. It's not possible. She was not, right? So, is it possible that Aisha spoke about what she always saw every time she witnessed the Prophet ﷺ relieving himself or speaking about it or teaching it? It was always sitting down. Is it not possible that she spoke about what she saw, and it was so overwhelmingly so, to the point where she said, he never did this. And if anyone tells you that he did otherwise, they are wrong. We understand from this that in normal circumstances, he would never urinate standing. If he had an option, that would not be his choice. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, Hudayfa tells us of what he saw. And Aisha was clearly not there in that incident. Therefore, Ibn Al-Qayyim tells us here, وَالْمُثْبِتْ مُقَدَّمْ عَلَى النَّافِ إِنْ صَحَّ. إِنْ صَحَّ يعني الحديث. He says, the one who affirms the action, we give precedence to that testimony over a person who completely negates its existence. Because negation is more general than affirmation. Affirmation is more specific. So we conclude from these two narrations of Hudayfa and Aisha radiyallahu anhuma that the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that he would, under normal circumstances, hardly ever, if ever, relieve himself standing. He would always sit. However, under pressing circumstances, he may veer from that. But that is definitely the exception and not the norm. Do we derive from this that it is impermissible for a person to relieve himself standing, even if they can sit? No. A person can relieve himself in any way that he chooses, as long as he does not soil himself or soil the area, etc. However, there is a difference between that which is permissible and that which is the sunnah. And we spoke about this in detail previously. قال رحمه الله تعالى فمراتب صومه مراتب صوم النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. إيش الفرق بين الصيام والصوم؟ إذا قلنا الصيام أو قلنا الصوم في فرق؟ كيف؟ الأكل والشرب في الاثنين. أنت يعني كربت جدا. إيش قلت يا أخوي؟ والله كربتوا، الاثنين كربوا ما شاء الله، عندنا مفسرين. طيب، في السنة وفي درج كلام الفقهاء ما في فرق. في كلام الفقهاء ما في فرق. وجدت في الكتاب صوم أو وجدت في الكتاب صيام، وجدت في الحديث صوم أو وجدت صيام، وجدت في كلام الصحابي صوم أو صيام، ما في فرق. ماشي؟ جاء في الحديث في البخاري عن ابن عمر بني الإسلام على 5: شهادة أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمد رسول الله وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة والحج وصوم رمضان. هكذا لفظ الحديث عند البخاري. في رواية أخرى عند مسلم عن عمر: أن تشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمد رسول الله وتقيم الصلاة وتؤتي الزكاة وتصوم رمضان وتحج البيت. في بعض الروايات وصيام رمضان. كلاهما صحيح. في الحديث، في كلام الصحابة، في كلام الفقهاء، الصيام والصوم بمعنى نفس المعنى. لكن في القرآن في فرق. في فرق. الصوم في القرآن عن الكلام فقط. إيش حكت مريم عليه السلام؟ فقولي إني نذرت للرحمن صوما، لكن الصيام كتب عليكم الصيام. في القرآن فقط التفرقة بين الصوم والصيام أن الصوم يكون عن الكلام، والصيام عن الأكل والشرب، وعن الصيام المعروف المعهود المشروع على المعنى الشرعي. وإلا في الصيام في الأصل معناه صام يصوم صوما، فهو معناه الإمساك، هذا في الأصل اللغة. ماشي؟ يقول فمراتب صومه أي عاشوراء. العلماء اختلفوا في صيام عاشوراء على أقوال. فبعض العلماء قال يصوم عاشوراء وحده. عاشوراء هذا اليوم سمي عاشوراء من أصل 10، يعني 10 محرم، اليوم 10 من شهر محرم، وهو الشهر الأول في التاريخ السنوي الهجري. بعض العلماء قال بل يقدم صيام عاشوراء بيوم، يعني يصوم يوم 9 واليوم 10، وبعضهم قال يصوم 10 و11، وبعضهم قال بل يصوم 3، 9 و10 و11. فإيش الراجح من فعل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم؟ صح عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه صام يوم عاشوراء، والرواية في ذلك معروفة مشهورة، والرواية في الصحيحين. النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم سأل اليهود حين قدم المدينة لم تصومون؟ فقالوا هذا يوم عظيم نجى الله فيه موسى فنحن نصومه. فقال نحن أولى بموسى منكم، فصام وأمر بصيامه. وكان صيام عاشوراء واجبا على المسلمين في أول تشريع الصيام، ثم لما فرض صيام رمضان وهو في السنة الثانية في الراجح، كان صيام عاشوراء مستحبا وبقي على استحبابه. فجاءت رواية عن ابن عباس النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا قدم المدينة، ماشي، قدم المدينة ووجدهم يصومون يوم عاشوراء فصامه وأمر بصيامه. هذا بيكون أي سنة في أعم الأحوال؟ السنة الأولى، صح؟ ماشي. النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم توفي في أي شهر؟ في الربيع، يعني في حجة الوداع، لما خطب خطبة حجة الوداع المشهورة اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي، توفي بعدها ب80 يوم، يعني 81 يوم. فهذا كان في ربيع. فإذا كم من عاشوراء ممكن صامها النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم؟ عندنا من أول سنة لسنة 11 لسنة 11. صحيح صحيح. فبده يكون على أعم الأحوال 11، لكن هذا أعم الأحوال. جاء في البخاري عن ابن عباس أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أخبروه أن اليهود يصومون يوم عاشوراء والمسلمون يصومون يوم عاشوراء، فوقع التشابه. وكان من التشريع أول ما قدم النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إلى المدينة كان الأمر له من الله أن يوافق أهل الكتاب في شريعتهم ما لم ينافي شريعتنا. القبلة كانت نفس القبلة، والشعر كان نفس الشعر، ثم جاء إيش؟ مخالفة أهل الكتاب. لما تحولت القبلة صار إيش؟ مخالفة أهل الكتاب. وهذه كانت فتنة لأهل الكتاب للتفرقة بين المنافقين والصادقين منهم. فلما وقع هذا التفريق ذكر للنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم تشابه اليهود بالمسلمين في صيام عاشوراء، فقال وأخبر أنه إن عاش إلى السنة المقبلة ليصومن يوما قبله أو بعده، هكذا الرواية. فمن ثم استحب للإنسان أن يصوم يوما قبله أو بعده، لكن ليس على الوجوب، ليس على الوجوب. إذا الإنسان مش قادر يصوم إلا يوم واحد يصوم عاشوراء وخلص، ما في مشكلة. لكن زيادة خير يصوم يوم عاشوراء ويصوم يوم قبله أو بعده. والذين قالوا بل يصوم 3 أيام، يصوم اليوم 9 و10 و11، قالوا ذلك لتحري يوم عاشوراء. ليش؟ لأنه الحساب ممكن يكون غلطان، ممكن يكون الهلال ظهر أو ما ظهر واختلف الناس، فقالوا احتياطا بصوم 1 9 و10 و11، لكن هذا القول فيه نظر. فعلى كل حال بصوم عاشوراء، هذا ثابت. وإن أراد زيادة خير صام يوم قبله أو يوم بعده، هذا هو الثابت في سنة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. يقول ابن القيم: فمراتب صومه أي عاشوراء 3، أكملها أن يصام قبله يوم وبعده يوم، وقد تحدثنا عن هذا القول، ثم أن يصام 9 و10، ثم أن يفرد 10، وهذا ما ذكرناه آنفا. Fasting on the day of Ashura. What is Ashura? Ashura or Ashura. This is a reference to the 10th day of the first month of the Islamic lunar calendar, right? So we have the first month, which is the month of Muharram. The 10th day is referred to as Ashura, meaning the day of the 10th. This 10th day is a day of fasting for the Muslims. It had a history, Ashura. Ashura was fasted by the Muslims before fasting the month of Ramadan became obligatory. Fasting the month of Ramadan became obligatory in the 2nd year after Hijrah. The first year, when the Prophet ﷺ first arrived to Medina, he saw that the Jews of Medina would fast the day of Ashura, the 10th day of the first month, the month of Muharram. And so he asked them, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, why do you guys fast this day? And they informed him that this is the day that marks the day when Allah parted the sea, the Red Sea, and delivered Musa and his people, Bani Israel, from the clutches and the bondage of Fir'aun, and destroyed Fir'aun. It was on that day, the 10th day of the month of Muharram. And so it is a grand day, and so it is a day of majesty, so we fast it out of thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that deliverance. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, we are closer to Musa than you are. We are closer to Musa. أولى يعني أقرب إلى موسى. We are closer to Musa than you. Meaning, in our religion, in our following, we are more similar to Musa than those who came after and lost his tradition, his legacy. And so the Prophet ﷺ fasted the day of Ashura, and he also commanded the Muslims to fast Ashura. Fasting Ashura at the beginning was obligatory. It was obligatory like Ramadan. It was wajib, and we discussed this previously. Then, later on, when Ramadan was made obligatory, fasting the month of Ramadan was made obligatory with its conditions and its regulations, fasting the day of Ashura later was made into something which is preferable for a person to do. It is preferable to fast the day of Ashura. It's not obligatory. The Prophet ﷺ was asked about fasting the day of Ashura. He said, fasting the day of Ashura, its reward is that a year past of sins will be forgiven. A year's past of sins will be forgiven. Meaning minor sins. Major sins, they have other rulings. Major sins, a person has to repent for major sins. Minor sins, according to the opinion of the majority of the scholars. Now, fasting the day of Ashura, why was it obligatory and then later something that is preferable, and then later it had another change, which is just before the Prophet ﷺ died, in the last year of his life, he was reminded that the Jews fast Ashura as well, along with the Muslims. They all fast together. And so, the Prophet ﷺ said, as is indicated by Ibn Abbas, that if I live till next year, inshallah, I will fast a day along with it, meaning a day before it or a day after it. However, he did not live till the next year, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we kind of have three stages here for the day of Ashura. And unfortunately, we have run out of time. Inshallah, next week, we'll continue our class and we will discuss this. A person may say, Yani, we're talking about fasting. Fasting is finished. This is not just about fasting Ramadan. We're still in the chapter of fasting. And fasting is a pillar of Islam, and it has rulings for Ramadan and outside of Ramadan. Allahu a'lam wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa jazakumullahu khairan.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.